Good evening. It's April 7th on the Alan Osborne Show, and we're going to stay on what we've been on, kind of. I hope y'all are enjoying John Walton, you know, John Walton, Chaz, but, is it really Chaz? And let's get back to this Fred Tricker issue. Now, who stands to benefit from Fred Tricker being thrown off the planning board? And who stands to benefit that the planning board has been convinced that it's a rubber stamp and it can disapprove very little? The planning board is supposed to help filter for the commissioners whether stuff is compliant with the comp plan and LDC and whether it's even good for the community. But you know who would benefit from that? Having Fred thrown off the board? Exactly what you're going to see tonight. I had some audio difficulties, so we're going to revisit the March 14th planning meeting, and we're going to watch what happens to Fred Tricker at this meeting. We're going to watch what happens to Matt Carpenter. So let's think about this. Mac's not going to go, as he says in there, against an attorney's order. It doesn't matter what the LDC says or what the comp plan says. Mac says Clay Atkinson is the supreme being over all issues, even though the LDC doesn't say that. And you'll hear Mac admit to them that they're just going to break the rules until they can make the rules fit the actions. But the man that plans to benefit this for the most, besides $1 Million Clay, is Mr. Gary Shipman, in my opinion, standing up there. Who's coming after Fred? It's Gary. Who's Tony Anderson's master? It's Gary Shipman and the Small Business Association. That's who put Tony in office. Tony gets the credit for their support. He went right in to destroy District 5. Look at the mess of infrastructure. But according to Gary, since the 1700s, by God, you can do anything you want, no matter how it affects people, how it fits in, what the lack of infrastructure. It's whatever's best for the property owner, most favorable. But that Gary's representing people. That's not the county attorney saying it. We're just gonna go watch this shit show go down, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. So we'll come back to it, and I'll step in on some of the what's going on here, and comment on it, and we'll just watch this shit show go down. This is why they want Fred off the board, and watch the county attorney during this mess. And then Shipman gets up out of order. Nobody sits him down because I think Lee's his partner. And then Perry just lets Shipman go off on another board member. This shit is bullshit. That's what it is. So let's go to that, back to that show, and see. Look who really wants Fred off this board. And you see old Chazzy Poo come in there to get his marching orders from Shipman, in my opinion. They make a nice eye contact and all that. But who stands to benefit? The man at almost every planning meeting telling the planning board members and the commissioners what they have to do, and nobody's standing up to him. This is a bunch of bullshit. So we pick up at the meeting. We've just said the Pledge of Allegiance, and watch Gary go over to Mac and give him his marching orders. So here we go.
Okay, I want to remind everybody we do have another meeting coming up this Tuesday. It's an informational meeting, but I assume that's open to the public, right? Okay. Did everybody get a chance to read the minutes?
That was a quick huddle from Melissa Ward, Mac, and Gary about how things are going to go down. Right there is where 90% of your deviations come from. Right there. Look at that little thing. And for you who need a history lesson, Miss Ward used to work for the county in planning, but she was fired for being unable to do math, in my opinion. So we got Mac, who's lost his real estate license, who's desperately got to have this job, and he's going to suck up to Gary. They've had the huddle, so watch this.
On the January 11th?
I did read them, and I'm going to make a motion to approve.
All right. No changes? All right. We have a motion. How about a second?
I'll second that.
And a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Here comes Chaz to sit right behind Gary, and he makes eye contact with him. He's getting his marching orders because Chaz has got to help get rid of all these people And anybody who's standing in the way of the developers and Shipman and the people who are going to make a buck off breaking all the rules, Chaz is the for-hire guy on them. That's just what my opinion is. So here we go. There's the eye contact to Gary.
You got something for us?
Ready to go as soon as you are.
Oh, I think Ed had something that he wanted to ask you a question. On something that regards an issue that came up at the February 22nd BCC meeting on the question of legislative versus quasi-judicial. And I'd just like to get a better understanding of that discussion. Because I think that when you're talking about PUDs, you know, there's a conceptual part of that, right?
County attorney, the far left's just typing.
From the land development code. And that's kind of why they're legislative, I believe, isn't it?
Well, at the last meeting, our county attorney redirected us until the land development code gets modified.
Our last meeting, the county attorney redirected us not to follow the rules until we passed something that hadn't even been gone before the voting body of people who represent us. So on their own, Clay Atkinson has told Mac, nah, I don't care what it says, we're doing business this way. And guess who benefits from that? Gary Shipman.
It's just making elements and bring a distinction between detailed our quasi-judicial hearings. It's a much higher standard of review, and the way to proceed until.
How can you have a much higher standard of review of a concept? This shit didn't even exist. Conceptual PUDs was created in the last 7 or 8 years. Go back in history and find another PUD, the county before Mac. It was conceptual. This is a bunch of garbage anyway. They want land rights over a concept. How can you have something over something that hadn't happened yet and you have no details of? P.S. Robert Nelson is lost in this. He just wants to know when he can leave. Vote yes and then leave.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand it because the people you're talking about for quasi-judicial says that for PUDs, they're not judicial, for both Ling and the BCC. But there is another table for legislative that talks about text amendments to the road. And is a PUD not a text amendment to the land development code?
If there is no land district, one would be adopted as a separate action.
Okay, so that's, I guess I don't understand why a PUD would be QC quasi-judicial based on that table when there's another table that says that it should be legislative.
The most restrictive of the two applies, and that is the quasi-judicial.
Okay, so the land development code says that you can't take one piece of the code in isolation. It has to be taken in the context of everything else. Isn't that right? Yeah.
Is it read as a whole? Does it have individual reference in there? Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So the answer to that question is yes and yes.
Why has Gary Shipman got up? Did Lee Perry signal him? Now Lee's got his mouth covered. They're partners, is my understanding, in LLCs or have been. Lee been up there about 20 years, and Gary has no role between Mac and Fred's interaction. This is a planning board member and the planning director having a conversation, but Gary's going to be allowed to come in on this. Now notice the county attorney, he's just over there typing away, not really listening, and he's going to let, between Lee Perry and the county attorney, they're going to let Fred try to be bludgeoned basically by Gary Shipman. This is the guy that wants this board to believe that anything he presents has to be approved. Well, if that was true, why would we have this process? This is just a bunch of bullshit, and this is the man that makes all the money off of it.
Yeah. So, who has the authority to interpret the land development code?
It's not John Walton and Gary Shipman.
Does the county attorney have the authority to interpret the land development code?
He absolutely is our legal advisor.
Yes.
For asking what the Land Development Code said. Clay has no role in it, and the issue he got upset is something that Clay was conflicted in. Now listen to Mac, Mr. I've lost my real estate license. I have to have this job. Basically, Mac says, I don't care what the rules on paper say. If Clay tells me to do it, we're just going to do it. And this is what's been wrong with our interim attorney. He without waiting for the legislative process to change the law or with any direction, he's just told Mac, we're going to do business this way. This is wrong. And look who's a redhead right there is about to die to jump up in the middle of it.
I think that's different, but I have to go with this thing.
Is he a land use attorney?
I don't know that I need to answer that question. He is the county attorney, and he is the supreme legal authority.
The supreme legal authority, and I don't even know if I need to answer your question, you peon planning board member. You're supposed to rubber stamp what Gary behind me says. Now, phony baloney, we've already got the plan. You're just here to listen to it.
I think the Board of Planning Commissioners and county staff.
Okay, so
and as I said, at that hearing, I take my direction from the county attorney. I do not dispute what he said.
yeah, I understand. I listened to what was said and also heard you say that it was your preference that it be handled legislatively. I mean, and I heard after that you said, well, I'll defer to the county attorney. But as far as I'm concerned, the Land Development Code says you're the authority. And I'm not really clear on what changes were being advocated, but I don't know that you need to change the code. And maybe what we just need is a written interpretation, and that becomes binding then that you put out. You have the authority to do that. And why don't we just do that? Because the code's okay the way it is.
I think the code needs some tune-up.
Okay?
I don't disagree with the county attorney.
Uh,
I don't disagree with the county attorney, but that is his interpretation. His interpretation of the code.
So Shipman raised his hand. He got waved off, but he doesn't have to sit down. Why are the deputies sitting Shipman down? He's not been recognized. Nobody else is allowed to do this. Special privileges for the elected and connected. And this is Mr. Connected. Connected to Chaz, connected to all this crap, connected to phony Tony and trying to throw Fred out, created all that SBA stuff. It's destroyed our community, what him and Tony and people have done. Folks, if you want developers and stuff in charge of your community, just leave these people in charge and unchecked, and we'll all be destroyed.
Well, I don't have the authority to supersede his advice to the county.
Okay, well, I believe you were right. And, I wish we just kind of stuck with doing things the way they should be done.
I would think anybody that doesn't take the advice of the attorney on this board, when he's telling us stuff, opens himself up for lawsuits outside this board.
Oh, yeah, Lee? What's your attorney, Mr. Chairman? What's he telling you? Right now, he's not even sure you're talking. Your attorney is to y'all's far right in the blue suit. He hadn't even looked up. And when you watch, Gary's going to bludgeon them, and isn't Gary your partner, and you're going to let him. You're going to take whatever advice, it doesn't matter. That's nuts. You got to look at the truth on its face. You know what it is? Gary doesn't want, Suzzane Harris and these people are exposing this corruption, and he doesn't like it because he needs that to do what he does. He's basically controlling, planning, and telling people what they have to approve. Attorneys and developers are running our county. That's who was behind the 1 cent tax. They want to tax you to death. That's why they're all getting sued for violating people's First Amendment rights. I swear, this redhead right here, he's causing a lot of problems. And, I think he's behind Chazzy Poo. So let Chaz keep writing those articles. And me and Suzzane will start, and everybody else is over here on the side of trying to stop this corruption. We're going to start pointing out Phony Tony and Gary Shipman and exactly what has happened in the past with these people. Because we have a right to say so. He doesn't have any more rights than anybody else to say anything or have any special rules. He just doesn't. Red on the head.
If he doesn't have the authority to make that interpretation, then I would question whether it's appropriate to do that. That's just a question.
Well,
Anyway,
I do believe that the county attorney has the authority to interpret the code. He's a lawyer. I am not. I'm a professional planner. It is my responsibility to do that until he steps in and decides there's a different interpretation.
But he's stepping in on issues he's conflicted with, you moron, and you'll go along with it because you've already lost your other license for accusations of fraud. You gave it up forever, right? You've got no other job to go to. Mac's in desperation mode, and he's not protecting any of us. You don't see him. He'll overbill for no infrastructure. He don't care. He's not an engineer. He's not a lawyer. He says he's the planning director, and that's what he's directing. As much stuff as he can plan to build and help these people as he'll do. He's a huge part of the problem, just like these board members that are sitting there staring off in space. Dean's an engineer. Michael Harbin couldn't give a crap less. And Perry, him and Shipman's buds. Robert Nelson, he's just Danny's political poem. But this is all of the Shipman show. And watch him come after Fred and tell him some bullshit about the 1700s. And watch the person we're paying to be Fred's attorney just sit there.
I back you up on your interpretation. I think it was correct.
Well, I appreciate that. I have to go with the county attorney.
And I understand that too. Thank you.
Mr. Shipman, you're a land use attorney, aren't you?
So Lee Perry calls him into it.
If Mr. Tricker listened to it, he would have heard that the reason we went to the PUD was because there was a decision by the 4th District Court of Appeals, which you and the county commission are bound to follow. And at that,
Nobody has said that everything that Shipman says that they're bound to follow. He makes all these declarations. I swear, red on the head like a dick on a dog. I'm so sick of this bullshit that it goes unchallenged, and there's our attorney over there with his thumb up his damn ass. While Fred gets, go ahead, shithead.
it was exactly the scenario. You had a government entity that they had in the land development code a specific.
So Gary has decided autonomously that it was exactly like this. And that Fred had, by God, better listen to his opinion and watch him. He's going to have to present later, tell this board basically that nobody can tell him no. And he goes unchallenged on that. Even by our own attorney. Unbelievable. And there's Perry with his hands over his face again.
Process for hearing a matter. I believe it was actually a PUD. And the court found that even though it may be a legislative matter, if your land development code required that a quasi-judicial procedure be followed, you had to follow it or it was a denial of due process for reversible error. And making that decision, the court talked about the 1973 Rinker case, and I know you heard of that because I cited all the law. In 1973, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that because land development codes and comprehensive plans and zoning regulations were a degradation of the common law, and we go all the way back to the adoption of the Constitution. I had to talk about that at one meeting, since people seem to be stuck on that.
Nobody asked you to talk about anything, and nobody said there is not one person other than you advocating your position. Nobody. This is total bullshit. In 1973, Walton County didn't have a comprehensive plan or a code. They didn't have one until 1996, Shipman. You didn't even start your firm until '04. We never saw you at any of them damn meetings. Where the hell were you?
All land uses follow English common law. That's what we adopted under English common law. You were free to do whatever you wanted to do with your land. So when you started adopting zoning regulations, land plan, and comprehensive plans, to the extent there's ambiguity in the documents, which you just pointed out there is, you have to go the method that is.
Fred didn't point out that there was an ambiguity. He said the table says what it says, and Max says Clay said we'll do what we're going to do. The ambiguity has been created by you telling Clay that and Clay telling Mac not to follow the laws that have been adopted correctly. That we're just going to skip that and let the process that we're required to do happen later, but we're going to do what we want to now. That's what's really the fuck going on.
Most favorable to the landowner. And that's what we did. Now, Clay Atkinson, the county attorney, when presented with a case that is directly on point from an appellate court in this state and has provided that to the county, they must follow that regulation just like you must. And if you don't, you are violating that landowner's due process rights guaranteed under the United States and Florida constitutions. So no, until it changes, any PUD, quasi-judicial.
Until it changes, Fred just says that the table says it's legislative, and we're talking about a concept. Mac freely admits that the code hasn't changed yet, and that's not what Shipman just said. Until it changes, you have to do it. How about you have to follow the law until you change the law, not when you've decided it doesn't let you do what you want. You're not the legislative body, Shipman. You're just a lawyer representing applicants. That's it. You have no other role in our government. None. And why are you sitting on the Regional Utilities Board? Boy, that's suspicious. Seems like that's a conflict.
That applies to both the conceptual and the detailed reviews? All conceptual reviews?
All reviews of PUDs, period.
Okay.
He doesn't answer the question. Gary, he said, what about conceptual? Gary doesn't answer it.
Must follow the quasi, and understand quasi-judicial is a procedural. There's actually a procedure. I know you disagree with me on this. In legislative, it's still a hearing. There is still a procedure that you have to follow. We tend to not do it in this county, but there's a procedure. If you do not follow.
Yeah, we don't follow the law in this county. We don't follow the procedures, but Gary said you have to. Didn't he just contradict himself that we don't do it? But he said you have to? Then why aren't you suing somebody, Gary? How come you haven't sued all these people over it if they tend not to do it, Gary? Is it because that Mac's going to rubber stamp whatever Clay tells him? He just said so. Anything Clay says to do, he's just going to do it, no matter what it is. No matter if Clay's an expert, no matter if Clay is conflicted, no matter if Clay's not a land use attorney, this is just bullshit. But go ahead, Gary.
Follow the procedure that is adopted by the county. You have violated the landowner's due process, and that's what that 4th District Court of Appeals case stands for. And to the extent that there's contradictory procedures, the Supreme Court, 51 years ago, has rendered a decision that's not been changed since then, that you have to rule it, you have to follow procedures most favorable to the landowner. It's a procedure.
And the other aspect of that too that came up at that meeting was whether the evidence had to be competent and substantial. And the answer was no, it did not.
No, it didn't. That didn't come up.
It absolutely did. I'll go back and
Fred, I'm the one that argued that all quasi-judicial is competent and substantial.
I know. You're right about that. I'm not arguing that. But Mr. Atkinson said at that meeting, and in this case, it would be, I think he called it deferential evidence.
Well, in that particular one at that meeting, you may recall, Mr. Tricker, that the sole issue was whether or not that PUD could exempt out having to have a component of commercial, which every single witness, even the people that were anti-development, said they didn't want commercial in there. So not only was their confidence substantial, there was clear and convincing evidence.
How come you never say that the stuff that we say is clear and convincing? Now you say people who said something about it, but they didn't want it. This is about following the rules, not pick and choose. You are part of the problem, and voters, Gary Shipman is out there yanking y'all's chain. Y'all like all this crappy emails you're getting and the fake John Walton. Who is the real John Walton? Like Suzzane Harris said, you know, who's really stands to benefit from this? Well, it's not us, the taxpayers. It's a few corrupt employees keeping their jobs and a bunch of lawyers and developers. Have we not seen enough of being wiped out of our infrastructure? Come on, voters. Watch the Shipman show. Watch this.
On the particular issue for the county commission. The reason for the PUD, the reason you follow that process is so that you're actually addressing the issue that is before the body,
Right.
not all these other things.
But that specific issue is a legislative issue. It's a policy issue, and not whether or not it conforms to the comp plan.
Okay, well, Mr. Tricker,
Yeah, because a concept is a policy because you don't know what the details of a concept are yet. That's why it's conceptual.
courts disagree with you. When you get a law license and you start practicing law, I guess you can appeal it.
Well, I don't think we need to have the decision on this tonight.
Then why'd you call him up, Lee? Why'd you let Shipman get involved?
Mr. Trick referencing 1.08.00, interpretation section of the code, and he was referring to subsection. The elements that make up the Walton County Land Development Code are interrelated and cannot be interpreted in isolation. They must be interpreted within a
Cannot be interpreted in isolation. And quasi-judicial tries to isolate it to the facts. And a concept doesn't have facts yet. It's conceptual. This is a mess. And we've seen who behind it. We saw who was here. Look, Robert Nelson's the sitting desk. This is just jacked up is what it is. And the fact that our attorney has sat there and done nothing through this, there's nobody there to stop them, and I guess the rules don't apply to Mr. Shipman. And that's the way it was on this updated thing. You can't make this stuff. Will the real John Walton stand up? Who's behind John Walton? Who gives him money? Who pays him to do this? And who stands to benefit? But it's not us, the taxpayers and the voters. It's the developers and Shipman and the other attorneys and Clay. $1 million Clay. Doesn't matter what the law says. Like Max says, I'll do what the county attorney tells me to do, even if the written rule in front of me says otherwise. Folks, different rules for the elected and connected. We see what this woke kind of crap is. We see what this liberal kind of development and what happened to South Walton? What happened to Walton County? Freeport, you're next. These same people are going to tear you to pieces, and then they'll move to the county seat. Nothing will be sacred from the greed, the money, and the lies. We've got to put an end to this. And until next time, I'll leave you right there with a big part of the problem, standing right there at the podium. So next time, let's say Fred Tricker, show up on Tuesday, and will the real John Walton stand up? Is it Chaz or is it Gary, or is it a conglomerate of people that just don't want us to know the truth or don't want you to know the truth? I know what the truth is. You can't make this shit up on the Alan Osborne show, but you can put it out of office. Till next time, something to think about. See you then.